In a forgotten corner of southern Texas, where the road vanishes into a sea of dry fields and empty land, stands a house that the town no longer mentions. No one visits it, no one cleans it, no one dares to look too long through its shattered windows. It's known as the Ramírez house, even though no Ramírez has lived there in decades. No one knows for certain what happened, but everyone in Alice, Texas, has heard whispers, fragmented stories, rumors of a curse that began in 1982. This is the full account, as survived by Mariela Ramírez. Hector Ramírez had worked his whole life in construction. He was a man with rough hands, a hunched back, and steady eyes. He had saved every possible dollar with the hope of giving his family a better life. When he found the house on the old rural road outside Alice, he didn't hesitate. The price was suspiciously low, but the property was large, 5 bedrooms, a huge back porch, and even an abandoned chicken coop. It was perfect for Mariela and their 3 sons, Daniel, Esteban, and little Samuel. The first night was quiet. The air smelled of old wood and damp earth. The kids were excited, running from room to room, exploring dark corners and laughing without a care. Mariela cooked beans and tortillas while Hector installed a light in the living room. Everything seemed normal, too normal, but that peace didn't last. On the second night, Mariela woke up at exactly 3:14 a.m. A soft sound, barely audible, was coming from the living room. It sounded like someone crying. She thought it was Samuel, but when she went to check, she found him fast asleep. The sound stopped as soon as she turned on the light. She told herself it was her imagination. The third night, it happened again. This time, along with the crying, she heard footsteps in the hallway. Not loud ones, slow, dragging steps like someone barefoot struggling to move. Hector slept soundly. She got up, took a crucifix, turned on the lights, nothing. The next morning, all the picture frames in the hallway were on the floor. Not shattered, not thrown, perfectly lined up, face down, side by side, like someone had gently taken them down and placed them there with precise intention. There was no wind, no tremors. Hector got angry and assumed the kids were playing a prank, but they swore they hadn't touched anything. As the weeks passed, the children began to change. Daniel, the oldest, became withdrawn and silent. He would hide under the bed for hours and flinch at the slightest noise. Esteban, the middle child, started talking to someone no one else could see. He still called Mariela Mom, but now he also spoke to the other lady, a figure only he could describe. Samuel, the youngest, stopped speaking altogether. It wasn't a tantrum. It wasn't fear. It was as if his voice had vanished. Doctors could find no explanation. Hector, concerned and growing desperate, began to investigate the house more thoroughly. At the end of the hallway, hidden behind a heavy curtain, was a door no one had noticed before, sealed with rusted chains and an old padlock. The former owner had said nothing about it. One afternoon, when Mariela and the children were away, Hector broke the lock with a crowbar. What he found inside made his blood freeze. The room reeked of decay and ash. The walls were covered in symbols, drawn in what looked like soot mixed with something darker, thicker. Melted candles were everywhere, surrounding a warped, upside-down crucifix nailed above a small child's dress hanging from a bent nail in the ceiling. The fabric was torn, stained, and it swayed gently, as though someone had just brushed past it. Hector backed away, shaken. From that day forward, he started sleeping less. He began muttering in a language no one recognized and kept a shotgun under the bed, loaded at all times. Mariela tried to get help from the church. The first priest to step into the house lasted no more than 20 minutes. He left sweating and visibly shaken. All he said was, "This house doesn't need holy water. It needs fire." The second priest, who promised to return for a full blessing, died of a sudden heart attack the night after his visit. That was when Mariela stopped reaching out. Then came the night Daniel woke up screaming. He swore a figure had been sitting at the foot of his bed, one without a face, only a shallow, breathing sound. Hector searched the entire house, top to bottom. He found nothing, but the next morning, the family's dog was found hanging from the backyard tree, lifeless. On the bark of the trunk, someone, or something, had scrawled the word in thick red letters, "Return." From that moment, no one slept peacefully. Every night was a parade of noises, footsteps, knocking, crying, laughter that didn't belong to anyone in the house. Lights turned on and off by themselves. Doors slammed. The television powered on at midnight, always on static. Mirrors fogged up with strange messages. One read, "You shouldn't have opened the door." Another, "He's still here." Then, one night, Samuel vanished. There was no broken window, no open door, no sign of forced entry or exit. He had been tucked into bed like always, kissed goodnight, a lullaby hummed by Mariella. But when morning came, his bed was empty, his blanket folded, his pillow undisturbed. The only thing out of place was a single blackened handprint smeared on the wall near the basement, small, like a child's, but long-fingered and crooked. The strange thing was that the basement door had been blocked by furniture for weeks. But that morning it stood wide open. The police were called. Search teams scoured the area. Bloodhounds sniffed the woods behind the property. Not a trace. No footprints. No tire marks. Nothing. The only thing they had was the handprint, and an old lock, rusted but intact, lying in the grass. The report listed Samuel as missing, possibly abducted. But the lead investigator later told a neighbor, off record, something in that house isn't human. Hector began to unravel. He blamed himself, said he had awakened something, that it whispered to him in the dark, that he could hear Samuel calling to him, but not in the way a child would. The voice was twisted, like it had been bent through smoke and static. He locked himself in the cursed room for hours at a time, scribbling symbols on the walls, lighting candles, chanting in whispers. He claimed the house wasn't haunted. It was alive and hungry. Mariella was broken. Her days became a blur of panic and desperation. She didn't sleep. She barely ate. She started locking the other two boys in their room at night for their own safety. Sometimes, they'd wake up with bruises. Other times, they'd find hair scattered on the floor, hair that didn't belong to anyone in the family. Then came the final straw. Late one night, Hector stood in the front yard, drenched in sweat, holding his shotgun. He screamed into the night, yelling at someone or something that no one else could see. The neighbors watched from behind closed curtains. They didn't interfere. No one dared. Without warning, Hector turned the shotgun on himself and pulled the trigger. The sound echoed for miles. The blast painted the front steps in red. The next morning, the police arrived to find a disturbing scene. The door to the sealed room was open again, and inside, the dress on the nail was gone. But in its place, carved into the wooden floor in perfect circles, were the words, "Another soul." Mariella didn't wait for answers. That same day, she packed a few clothes, grabbed her two remaining sons, and fled the house barefoot. She left behind everything, the photos, the toys, even her wedding ring. She didn't look back once as she drove away. Some say she changed her name and moved north, maybe to Oklahoma, maybe to New Mexico. No one knows for sure, but everyone who knew her agreed. Part of Mariella never truly escaped that house. The house sat vacant after that. A for sale sign rotted in the front yard, eaten by termites. No buyers came forward. No one dared even step onto the porch. The bank foreclosed on it, but no agents would enter. Over time, nature began to swallow the place. Ivy strangled the windows. Weeds grew waist-high. Insects infested the gutters. Still, the house stood, untouched by storms or time, like it refused to die. Local kids dared each other to get close. They called it the mouth. Some said if you stood at the front door long enough, you'd hear breathing from inside. Others claimed the windows would show your reflection, but blinking. So went inside. A few came out screaming. One girl, Liza Herrera, ran all the way home in the middle of the night without shoes, her hands torn from clawing at something. She never spoke again. Not once. Her parents moved away 6 weeks later. Then came Father Collins. In 1989, a traveling evangelist, Father Isaac Collins, heard rumors of the cursed property. He was bold, theatrical, a man who believed no darkness could withstand the power of God. With a Bible in one hand and a bottle of holy water in the other, he entered the house during a Sunday afternoon while a local news crew waited outside to document the exorcism. The camera was left on a tripod near the doorway. What it captured was never aired publicly, but a leaked copy surfaced years later, passed around in grainy VHS copies. The footage showed Father Collins walking confidently through the foyer, praying loudly, sprinkling water. But after just 5 minutes, his voice began to falter. He stood frozen in front of the sealed door, now shut again and newly chained, his lips moving silently, eyes wide with something close to terror. The camera tilted slightly, as if nudged by a breeze. Then everything went black. When the police arrived the next morning, they found a front door wide open. Inside, Father Collins was curled into a corner of the living room, naked, shivering, covered in ash and what appeared to be dried blood. His fingernails were gone, and both of his eyes were rolled back, completely white. On his chest, carved deeply with what looked like a shard of mirror, was a single word: offering. He was taken to a psychiatric facility in Corpus Christi, where he spent the remainder of his life in silence. He never spoke another word. He never reacted to light, sound, or touch. He would spend his days drawing spirals on the walls of his padded room, over and over, until his fingers bled. When he died in 1995, an autopsy revealed strange burns across his chest in the shape of symbols that no one could identify. After that, the county boarded up the house and placed a steel fence around the perimeter. Condemned, they called it, a hazard to the public. But the local sheriff's department stopped responding to calls involving the property. One deputy, newly transferred, made the mistake of entering the house alone after receiving a report of lights flickering. His dash cam showed him walking through the front door. The footage ended with static. He was found 3 days later in a nearby field, barefoot, dehydrated, and muttering, "It's behind the walls," over and over. The house had become legend. By 1998, even the maps had stopped listing the property. Mail was no longer delivered to the address. Delivery drivers avoided that stretch of road. And still, the house stood untouched. No decay, no collapse. A monument to something invisible but enduring. Then came the twins. In the fall of 2001, two teenage brothers from Houston, Marcus and David, decided to film a documentary on urban legends. They drove to Alice, set up cameras around the house, and documented every step. The footage they uploaded that night showed them exploring the front room, the kitchen, the narrow hallways. Everything was fine until they reached the basement door. Marcus went first. David followed, holding the flashlight. The feed cut out at 3:14 a.m., exactly the same minute that Mariella had once awakened to the sound of crying. Neither boy was ever seen again. Days later, the house was surrounded by police tape, though no one was brave enough to step inside. A neighbor, curious and reckless, claimed he saw someone inside the house at night. Two figures standing by the second-story window, unmoving. One tall, one shorter, both facing outwards, not blinking. When the police reviewed the footage from the twins' camera equipment recovered outside the home, only one frame was salvageable. It showed the basement door cracked open. Behind it, a figure with glowing eyes. No face, just eyes floating in blackness. Then, the front door of the house slammed shut, caught by one final camera before the battery died. On the door was a note, smeared in a dark, red-brown substance. The words were barely legible, scratched in wild loops. They fed it. Who's next? After that, no one tried again. Not for years. The town of Alice seemed to forget. People stopped talking about the house. A local councilwoman suggested demolishing it, but the project never received approval. Every demolition company that received the bid went out of business within weeks. One manager suffered a fatal fall. Another had a stroke days after visiting the property line. Eventually, the house was left off all records. People simply ignored it, as if pretending it wasn't there would make the horror fade. But evil doesn't fade. It festers. It waits. In 2009, a woman named Leah Torres moved into a trailer 3 miles from the Ramírez house. Fresh out of a bitter divorce, she wanted peace, silence, isolation. For the first few months, she worked night shifts at a diner. slept during the day. It seemed like a fresh start, until the dreams began. They started small, dark corridors, flickering lights, the sound of a child crying her name. Always the same name, always the same time, 3:14 a.m., and always coming from the direction of the house. At first, Leah thought they were just dreams, stress, trauma. But then, she began waking up in strange places, standing in her kitchen with muddy feet, holding objects she didn't own. One night, she woke up outside, barefoot, standing at the rusted gate of the Ramírez property. In her hand was a piece of glass with a word scratched into it: return. Leah was terrified. She didn't remember walking there. She didn't know how she had left her home or how long she had been gone. Her feet were cut and bleeding. Her nightgown was torn, and yet she felt no pain, just an overwhelming sense of dread and familiarity. Over the next few days, things worsened. Objects moved in her trailer. Cold spots formed around mirrors. Her reflection didn't always mimic her movements. One afternoon, she caught her own image smiling when she wasn't. That same night, she heard whispers coming from her closet. A soft voice, not threatening, but pleading. He's still hungry. Desperate for answers, Leah went to the local archives. She searched for anything related to the Ramírez house. That's when she discovered the deeper history, records from before the Ramírez family even moved in. The property had once belonged to a preacher in the late 1800s, a man named Ezekiel Thorne. He was excommunicated for performing what the church called blasphemous blood rituals. No one knew what happened to him, but neighbors reported seeing strange lights at night, hearing chanting, and watching animals disappear. Ezekiel had written in his journals, which Leah managed to find excerpts of online, that the land was a mouth between worlds. He believed the house built upon it was a gate, a point of contact between our reality and something deeper, older, and darker. Something he had learned to feed. The more Leah read, the worse her sleepwalking became. She started keeping journals to document her dreams. The entries became increasingly chaotic. Sketches of teeth, black doorways, a child with hollow eyes calling out Samuel. Pages torn, sentences half-written. One entry read only, "It lives behind the wall. It waits for the mother." Neighbors began seeing her at strange hours, walking barefoot in the field near the house, speaking to someone they couldn't see. Sometimes she'd laugh. Sometimes she'd cry. But she never stopped walking, never stopped looking toward the gate. On the last night she was seen, a violent storm struck the county. Lightning crashed, winds howled, and Leah Torres was seen for the final time, stepping through the front gate of the Ramírez house, barefoot, soaked, and whispering, "I forgive you." She never came back. After Leah's disappearance, something shifted. For the first time in years, the house seemed awake. The air around it grew colder. Animals avoided the property entirely. Birds that flew over it often dropped dead in nearby yards. And strange static interference began affecting devices within a mile radius. Phones, radios, even hearing aids. People whispered that the ground had begun to hum. A low vibration felt through shoes but not heard by the ears. The local authorities, pressed by the community, installed motion detection cameras along the road leading to the house. Most footage captured only fog or blank screens. But once, just once, a frame showed something impossible. A woman, barefoot, holding the hand of a child. She was walking away from the house. The woman resembled Leah. The child, some said, had the same curly hair as Samuel Ramírez. But the image was grainy, distorted, and disappeared seconds later. When officers reviewed the footage again, the file was corrupted beyond recovery. All that remained was a still frame, a door opening by itself in the dark. After that, the city gave up. They fenced the entire property off with barbed wire and posted warnings. Private property, danger, and no entry. But it didn't stop the curious. A group of paranormal investigators snuck in one fall night with high-end equipment. They live-streamed everything: thermal cameras, EVP recorders, body cams. At first, it was what you'd expect: creaking wood, cold drafts, strange noises. But at exactly 3:14 a.m., all transmissions went dead. When a rescue team entered the property at dawn, They found the investigators' gear piled neatly on the living room floor. Cameras, lights, tripods, all arranged in a perfect circle. But there was no sign of the team, just a message carved into the wood paneling of the wall. T.O. Watch is T.O. Invite. None of them were ever found. After the paranormal team vanished, fear took root like never before. The locals no longer whispered about the house. They avoided mentioning it altogether. Some older residents insisted that just speaking of it aloud was enough to draw its attention. And those who had once dared to drive past it at night now took long detours, even if it meant adding hours to their trips. But darkness doesn't need an invitation when it's already inside. That winter, a nearby family, new to the area, unaware of the house's history, moved into a rental only a few hundred yards away. A single mother, Teresa Sandoval, and her teenage son, Luis. They noticed the house, of course, but the real estate agent simply called it an abandoned historical property. Teresa was practical, unconcerned with ghost stories. Luis was curious. It didn't take long for the dreams to start. Luis began waking up at night, hearing a knock at his window. The first time, he thought it was wind. The second time, he swore he saw a face, a small face like a child's, staring at him through the glass. He screamed. Teresa came running, but found nothing. Just a strange, wet handprint smudged on the outside of the window pane. Then came the laughter. It echoed through their home at random times. High-pitched, playful, but distant, like it came from inside the walls. Luis stopped sleeping. He became pale, thin, anxious. He told his mother that something was calling to him, that he saw a little boy in his dreams standing in the front yard of the boarded-up house, asking him to come play. Then, one morning, Luis was gone. No signs of forced entry. No open doors. His bed untouched. Just his shoes placed neatly by the door. And on the bathroom mirror, in dripping condensation, the words, "He came home." Teresa broke down. She screamed for help. She pounded on her neighbors' doors. When the police came, they searched every inch of her house. Then, against every protocol and warning, they stepped onto the Ramírez property to look for Luis. They didn't get far. Before even reaching the porch, one officer collapsed. He began convulsing violently, his mouth foaming, eyes rolling back. The others pulled him back over the fence, and as soon as they cleared the property line, he stopped. He lay still, gasping, muttering a single phrase through bloody teeth. "It's inside me." He was taken to the hospital and later diagnosed with unexplained neurological trauma. He would never return to duty. After that incident, Alice officially declared the Ramírez house a no-go zone. It was removed from GPS databases. The road was rerouted. Street signs were taken down. If someone wanted to find the house, they would have to know where to look. But some still did. Thrill seekers, internet haunted house vloggers, satanic cultists. None of them lasted. Some were found wandering in the fields with no memory of who they were. Some simply disappeared. One of the most disturbing cases involved a group of university students who entered the house as part of a research project on folklore. They kept journals. One of the recovered pages, written in a shaky hand, described a wall inside the basement that breathed and whispered things like, "Thank you for the gift," and "The mother is near." When rescue crews entered the house 3 days later, they found the basement door chained shut from the inside. No bodies, no blood, just 4 shadows burned into the wood floor, as if someone had held torches against the boards, each one in the shape of a person mid-scream. Only one student was ever found. She had walked into a gas station 20 miles away, barefoot and soaked in red mud. When asked her name, she simply said, "I don't remember." But he does. The girl was hospitalized under psychiatric evaluation. She spoke very little, and when she did, her words were fragmented, cryptic. Doctors noted severe signs of trauma, malnourishment, dissociative amnesia, and repetitive behaviors. She would stare into mirrors for hours, murmuring, "Don't blink." It sees movement. And at exactly 3:14 a.m. each night, she would sit upright in bed, eyes wide open, and whisper, "He's coming through." Her recovery was slow and incomplete. She never remembered her name. The other students were never found. Their car remained in the woods, its keys still in the ignition, the doors unlocked. The engine had never been started again. Soon after, a journalist named Rafe Mendoza arrived in Alice. He had written exposés on haunted prisons and crime-ridden border towns. He came looking for a story, but what he found was far worse than he expected. Locals refused to talk. The few who did spoke in riddles. One old man in a wheelchair told him, "The house don't keep you out. It lures you in. That's how it eats." Rafe broke into the property late one night with a GoPro strapped to his chest. He live-streamed it. Thousands watched in real time. For the first 15 minutes, it was uneventful. Dust, silence, old wood creaking under his steps. He entered the living room, panned his camera toward the blackened fireplace. And then everything changed. The stream glitched. Viewers reported seeing a second figure appear behind him. Tall, pale, with no face, standing just beyond the edge of the frame. Rafe didn't react. He kept speaking, narrating what he saw. Then, he turned the camera toward the hallway. A child's voice whispered through the stream, "I found you." The video ended with a loud shriek. Not Rafe's. Authorities found his body the next morning in the center of the living room. Not torn apart, not wounded, but desiccated, completely dry, like every ounce of fluid had been sucked from his body. His skin was paper. His eyes were gone. Yet, bizarrely, his face was locked in a smile. The camera was never recovered. After Rafe's death, the town fell into full silence. Alice became a place where even maps hesitated to label. Businesses shuttered. Schools closed. Families moved away in waves. Only the oldest residents remained. Those too poor to leave or too stubborn to die. But the house, it remained. Weather didn't touch it. Winds that toppled nearby trees would shift and bend around it. Storms rolled over Texas, breaking rooftops and flooding fields, but the Ramírez house stood untouched, dry, upright, as if protected or preserved. And the hunger inside it grew. It was during one of the coldest winters on record that the town faced a new nightmare. Children began disappearing again, not in clusters, one by one. A girl walking home from school, a boy playing in his backyard, a toddler who vanished during a power outage. No clues, no ransom notes, just gone, and always, without exception, the same time stamped on surveillance footage or household clocks when the child vanished. 3:14 a.m. One mother swore she heard singing coming from the woods near the old house. A lullaby, soft and distant. She said it was her daughter's voice, singing a song they used to hum at bedtime. But when she followed the sound, all she found was a small shoe nailed to a tree, and beneath it, claw marks dug deep into the bark. 5 fingers too long, too thin. It wasn't just children who were affected. Adults began experiencing shared hallucinations, seeing figures in their homes, losing time, dreaming of doorways with no handles, and always waking at 3:14, drenched in sweat, hearts racing. Some tried to pray. Others moved away. A few took their own lives, writing "It's already here" in jagged letters on their walls before doing so. By 2018, the government intervened. Quietly, without press. A team of agents in unmarked vehicles arrived in Alice and sealed off the area. They claimed it was a contaminated zone, chemical leaks, unsafe structures. But those who watched from afar said the men who went into the house didn't all come out. Of the 7 who entered, only 3 returned. And they were not the same. They didn't speak, didn't blink. One sat in his car for 12 hours afterward, eyes fixed forward, hands gripping the wheel, engine off. Another collapsed on the tarmac of the private airstrip, screaming and clawing at his ears until he passed out. The last simply vanished from the hospital bed where he was being monitored. After that final incident, the town of Alice was declared restricted territory. Fences were erected around a 5-mile radius. Satellite images of the area were quietly blurred. Drones sent in for monitoring lost signal as soon as they passed the outer perimeter. When they returned, if they returned, they were burned black, their data corrupted. No one dared investigate further. But the house still stood. It began to appear in dreams again, not just for locals, but for strangers thousands of miles away. People in cities across the U.S., even outside the country, reported waking at 3:14 a.m., heart racing, images of a crooked hallway and a child's laugh fading in their ears. Some described a door that throbbed like flesh. Others drew the same symbols that once lined the walls of Ezekiel Thorne's room. Symbols no one taught them, in languages no one remembered. Psychics who tried to tune in to the house bled from the nose within seconds. One fell into a coma. Another gouged out her own eyes after whispering, "It's looking back." Still, the legends persisted. You can find videos online, grainy, forbidden, pulled, and reposted constantly, of people who claim to have filmed the Ramírez house from a distance. You'll hear the wind shift. You'll see shadows move in windows that shouldn't exist. One clip shows a silhouette of a woman hanging from the ceiling, gently turning, though no such room matches the house's floor plan. People argue about the truth. Some say it's a government project. Others believe it's the site of an ancient curse. But those who know the real stories, the journals, the footage, the names, they don't argue. They stay quiet. They draw their curtains. And they never, ever say the name of the house aloud after dark. Even now, those who live on the edges of the town say they hear things carried on the wind. Children laughing when there are none around. Whispered prayers. Knocking, soft and distant, like something trying to find its way through the earth. And if you listen carefully, very carefully, you might hear the door. The one they opened. The one that never closed again. It's said that the house is no longer content to remain still. That it pulses with something alive. That the land beneath, it isn't just cursed, it's hollow. A cavern of sorts. A space between, where time folds and light is devoured. Some claim to have seen the ground ripple beneath their feet when standing too close to the rusted fence line. Others say the fence itself moves ever so slightly, as though pushed from the inside. In 2020, during the height of global chaos, two amateur ghost hunters from Louisiana, brothers, snuck past the barricades. Their names were Eli and Trevor Myers. They live-streamed their journey on a hidden channel, hoping to gain fame from their exclusive access to one of the most infamous sites in America. Their feed started late at night. You can still find fragments of it on the darker corners of the internet. It began as most do: shaky footage, sarcastic commentary, nervous laughter. They entered through the side of the fence, climbed a rotted shed, and dropped into the backyard. The house loomed ahead, larger than it should have been, its roofline jagged like broken teeth. Eli joked about going in first. Trevor stayed back to adjust the camera. For 5 minutes, the screen showed nothing but static and the sound of footsteps on old floorboards. Then came the scream. High-pitched, not Eli's. The feed returned briefly. Eli was gone. The door was wide open. Trevor shouted for him, his voice trembling. He stepped inside, camera in hand. The footage turned blue-green from night vision. It showed narrow halls, a mirror, a stairwell leading down. Then a voice, soft and not human. Another mother. The final image from the stream was Trevor's own reflection, smiling back at him with a face not his own. The camera was found days later, embedded in the trunk of a tree half a mile from the house, like it had been driven into the bark by force. No trace of the brothers was ever recovered. But late one night, a new sign appeared on the house's porch, written in fresh black ink. It's learning. The message on the porch, it's learning, unsettled even the most skeptical minds. No longer was the house simply a place of horror. It was evolving. Those sensitive to energy claimed the entity within had grown more intelligent, more patient, more selective. It no longer waited to be approached. It whispered now, through screens, through speakers, through dreams, not just to those nearby, but to anyone who gave it attention. A man in New Jersey claimed he watched a documentary about the house one night and woke up the next morning with soil in his mouth. A girl in Argentina saw a shadow crawl across her ceiling after reading a blog post about Samuel Ramírez. In Japan, a spiritual medium attempted a remote viewing ritual and died of sudden cardiac arrest at exactly 3:14 a.m. Patterns began to emerge. Time, always 3:14. Symbols, always spirals drawn clockwise, then counterclockwise. Language, always in whispers, always just behind the ear. People started reporting the same dream across the globe. A child holding a mirror, walking backwards through a long, narrow hallway. No matter who had the dream, it always ended with a door at the far end, a door that throbbed like muscle. And a choice: open it or wake up. Those who opened it often went missing in real life within days. Others survived, but never fully returned to themselves. They would stare at walls for hours, speak in tongues, or claw at their skin, insisting something was beneath it. Psychologists struggled to classify the condition. They called it contagious night terrors, but the numbers didn't lie. In the year following the Myers brothers' disappearance, more than 200 people across 15 countries reported identical symptoms, despite no shared connection, except one. They had all looked for the house. They had all found its story. They had all heard the child's laugh. Some believed the story itself had become a virus. Not digital, not biological, something older. A mimetic infection, seated in the subconscious, feeding off thought, attention, belief. The more people knew of the Ramírez house, the more power it gained. Like a name given shape, a hunger given invitation. Occult scholars called it a thought entity, an egregore born from accumulated fear. But that theory crumbled under scrutiny because the earliest known mentions of the house predated electricity. One diary from 1843, written by a settler's wife in the region, described her child speaking to the black man under the floor and drawing spirals in ash. She later burned down her home with herself and her family inside. Her last journal entry read, "He waits behind the door with too many teeth." Digital forums banned discussion of the house after several users went missing or reported psychotic breaks. Podcasts that tried to cover the story experienced technical failures. Files would delete themselves. Guests would cancel last minute with no explanation. One host, in a now-deleted episode, admitted on air that ever since recording, his infant daughter had begun crying every night at 3:14 a.m., but not in her voice, in someone else's. Those who truly studied the house began to notice that it no longer required physical entry to infect, just knowledge, just curiosity. The mere act of imagining it was enough to open a channel, a crack, a doorway. That's when the disappearances resumed. Seemingly unconnected people began vanishing again. A teacher in Oregon, a fisherman in Nova Scotia, a nurse in Cairo. But investigators found strange similarities in each case. All had purchased used books or hard drives online. All had visited obscure blogs about urban myths. All had, at some point, searched for Ramírez House real story on the internet. And every single one of them had spiral symbols carved into their walls, sometimes in soap, sometimes in blood. By 2023, the spiral had become a warning. Graffiti artists in Berlin painted it without knowing why. Children in Malaysia doodled it on school desks. It showed up in frozen frost patterns on apartment windows, on receipts, on phone screens, burned faintly into pixels. Always there for those who had heard or listened. And then came the fractures. That's what they called the sudden disappearances of time. People started reporting skips, moments lost without memory. A man in Florida claimed he left for work at 8 a.m. and arrived in his office 3 towns over without knowing how he got there 6 hours later. Dashcam footage showed him driving, but his eyes were blank. He didn't blink once. Another woman, a librarian in Canada, was caught on security footage standing in front of a mirror in the staff bathroom for 11 hours straight. When asked what she was doing, she said, "I was waiting for him to speak." She didn't remember anything after. Patterns in radio static began spelling words. Morse code experts traced messages hidden inside hisses and clicks broadcast during power surges across Texas. They repeated 3 phrases: "It listens, it remembers, and she is the last key." This she, many suspected, was Mariela Ramírez. But no one could find her. It was as if she had been erased. No records, no death certificate, no living relatives. Some say she changed her name and moved across the border. Others claim she never left the house, that what walked away with her 2 sons that night was not her at all. but something else wearing her face. There are even theories that she never existed, that the story was always about the house, and everything else, Hector, Samuel, even the other children, were just pieces added over time by the entity itself, building a narrative to spread, to root deeper, to breathe. The few who dared to keep researching began to describe the house not as a place, but as a pattern. One researcher, Dr. Aisling Varone, a linguist from Ireland, published a paper proposing that the Ramírez house wasn't a singular location, but a reoccurring structure that appears across different cultures and centuries under different names. She linked spiral symbols and doorway dreams to an ancient Sumerian deity believed to be the guardian of forbidden knowledge. Others knew it as the mouth between. Weeks after publishing her work, Dr. Varone disappeared. Her last known communication was a voicemail left on her colleague's phone, whispering, "I saw the boy." His mouth was full of mirrors. Attempts to access her research were unsuccessful. Her files were wiped from cloud storage. Physical copies went missing from university archives. Even her photograph was removed from academic directories. It was as if something or someone had erased her existence. Not long after, people began finding mirrors cracked down the center in abandoned places. Hospitals, schools, bus stops. Each crack formed a perfect spiral if viewed from the right angle. Those who looked into them for too long reported nausea, dizziness, and visions of a hallway stretching into forever with soft footsteps behind them. A priest in Venezuela performed a mass exorcism on a family who claimed their child wouldn't stop whispering about the room behind the teeth. During the ritual, the lights went out, and when they returned, the child had vanished from the locked room. On the floor, written in ash, was a single phrase in perfect Latin, "Vocavit matrem." He is called the mother. Everything pointed to a single truth. The house no longer needed walls. It had moved into memory, into architecture, into language. It lived in the cracks of consciousness now, stitched into bedtime stories, into the hum of broken radios, into the shape of bruises left by dreams. And the question wasn't, where is the house? The question was, how long until it finds you? Some people tried to resist. Entire online communities sprang up, dedicated to avoiding all mention of the house. They filtered search terms, erased stories, warned newcomers. But even they weren't safe. One forum administrator posted a final message before deleting the group entirely. "We stopped writing about it, but the dreams never stopped. We forgot the house, but it remembered us." Others went further. A cult formed in Romania, calling themselves the Watchful Mouth. They believed the entity was not evil, but the first true God, forgotten, buried under time and concrete, now waking once more. They built shrines of broken glass and whispered prayers in spirals drawn on the earth. 2 members burned themselves alive in public squares, smiling. Authorities dismissed them as fanatics, but the footage of their self-immolation revealed something strange. Neither blinked, not once, during the entire process. A few survivors of encounters with the house's influence began reporting shared visions of a great eye, not watching them, but waiting for them to look back. They describe its gaze as ancient, not malicious, but inevitable, like gravity or time. One said, "It doesn't hate us. It just wants us inside." That phrase began repeating in odd places, graffiti, encrypted chat rooms, chalkboards in abandoned schools. It wants us inside, and all across the world, doors began appearing in places they shouldn't be. In the middle of hallways, at the backs of closets, inside office buildings, doors that didn't match any architectural style. No handle, no hinges, just a smooth surface slightly warm to the touch and breathing, almost imperceptibly. Those who opened them were never seen again. Those who didn't were haunted by the sound of knocking, precisely at 3:14 a.m. every night. By now, governments no longer denied it. They couldn't. Too many agents had vanished. Too many files had rewritten themselves. Insecure servers began to self-purge any references to the house. Keywords triggered errors. Internal departments formed whose only purpose was containment. Not of a location, but of a concept. They called it Event Ramírez. It was classified as an ontological contaminant, an idea capable of changing the fabric of reality by being understood. A pattern that, once known, could spread like fire through language, art, and thought. Not a virus, but an infection of attention. There were protocols, redactions, memory wipes, blackout zones. But it was too late, because people kept asking questions. They kept searching, and the house, whatever it was, kept answering. In murmurs, in reflections, in dreams, artists began to paint without knowing why. Always the same hallway, the same door, the same child in shadow. Musicians heard notes in static. A jazz composer in Chicago played a spontaneous piece on a rainy afternoon, and every plant in the room withered by the final chord. The recording, when played backward, contained a voice whispering, "She opened the wrong door." A girl in Iceland sculpted a perfect model of the Ramírez house out of clay, despite having never left her village, never used the internet, never even heard the name. When asked how she knew, she simply said, "He told me." One by one, cracks appeared in our reality. Things that couldn't happen happened. Entire towns forgot their own names. People turned up speaking dead languages. Planes landed with passengers who didn't match any manifest. And always, in the center of it all, was the echo of a name carved into the back of the world. Samuel, the boy lost to a house that never should have existed. A house that now existed everywhere. In silence, in memory, in waiting. And as the spiral widened, something began to push through. What came through wasn't a monster. It wasn't a demon or a ghost, or even something that could be seen with the eyes. It was an absence, an unmaking, a hole in the shape of a thought, one that once lodged into the human mind could never be removed. People began to describe it differently, not as fear, but as forgetting, as walking into a room and not knowing who you were, as hearing your own voice from behind your head, as watching the sun rise, but it didn't feel right. The color was wrong. The light was hollow. And still the house called. People kept dreaming of the door. Some tried to build it physically, replicating it from their dreams, using wood, plaster, or mirrors. But every single one of those doors, when completed, opened on their own at 3:14 a.m. Not everyone who opened it disappeared. Some returned, but they weren't people anymore. Neighbors described them as too still, too quiet, always watching. They didn't eat. They didn't sleep. And when they spoke, it was always in someone else's voice. Sometimes a child's, sometimes a woman's. Once a dog barked for 5 straight hours outside one of their homes before its body turned inside out. Hospitals couldn't explain the symptoms. Churches refused to intervene. Even the Vatican issued a rare global bulletin advising exorcists to avoid interaction with unidentified doors or unnatural mirror symbols. But it didn't stop. By the time the house had fully crossed over, whatever that meant, it no longer needed a physical form. People spoke of seeing it in passing subway windows, in rain puddles, reflected in the eyes of loved ones during arguments. A single blink too long, a whisper in a voice that wasn't there. And in every instance, a child's laugh followed. The laugh was the last warning. Soft, delicate, sometimes joyful, sometimes sorrowful, but always belonging to the same child, Samuel Ramírez, or what remained of him, because by now, no one could say for certain if Samuel had ever been a real boy, or if the house had shaped him into something else. A lure, a voice it could use, a familiar shape worn like a mask. And that laugh began to echo across generations. Babies were born already laughing. Doctors called it a rare seizure disorder, but the recordings told a different story. When played backward, the laugh became a message. The door was opened. You are next. In some cities, people began to disappear without leaving behind a single item. Clothes, wallets, even teeth gone. Not a trace. Except for one thing, spirals carved into bedsheets. Drawn with fingers or something sharper. Spiral graffiti began appearing in the clouds of digital servers. Anomalous code embedded in weather simulations and stock market data. One AI trained on public security footage spontaneously generated a floor plan. Experts didn't recognize it until a retired cop from Alice, Texas, confirmed it matched the interior of the Ramírez house perfectly. Except now, there were more rooms. New ones. Endless ones. A hallway within a hallway. A staircase leading only down. A room with nothing but a black mirror facing a rocking chair. No furniture. No plumbing. Just the structure and the silence. And every door slightly ajar. Waiting. Governments went dark. Research teams stopped publishing. One final leak came through, a recording from a supposed containment zone. All that could be heard was breathing, and at the very end, a soft knock. Once, twice, then a voice. Mom. The audio ends with the sound of a door creaking open. By now, most who remembered the house had gone quiet. Some locked themselves away. Others erased every digital trace of their identity, hoping anonymity would protect them. But the house didn't need names anymore. It didn't need locations. It needed only memory. And memory, by its very nature, spreads across photographs that shouldn't exist, in lullabies hummed by those who never learned them, in children drawing perfect spirals before they can even speak. The few who tried to fight back organized small resistance groups, rituals, sigils, neural blockers, but none lasted. Not because they were defeated, but because they forgot why they had started. As if something reached inside their minds and gently rearranged the truth, until even they questioned what had ever been real. Even now, you might wonder, was there ever a house? Did the Ramírez family exist? Did Samuel? Or were they always just reflections in a story designed to lure you closer? To make you imagine a hallway, a room, a voice behind the wall. Because it's never been about the house. It's about what the house represents. A breach, a weakness in the structure of reality. A place where thought becomes doorway, and you, reader, have now walked too far inside. It hears you. You've read its name. You've pictured the door. And that's all it ever needed. So now listen. Do you hear it? A faint knock, somewhere in the distance. Not from your door. Not from your walls. From something closer. Inside your thoughts. It would start subtly. A dream, maybe. A hallway with no light at the end. A child's silhouette, head tilted, whispering something you can't quite make out. Then the time will change. Your phone, your clock, your oven. One day they'll all say 3:14, and you won't remember setting them. You'll glance into a mirror and think, for the briefest second, that your reflection blinked at the wrong time. You'll hear laughter. Not loud, not evil, just wrong. And maybe you'll try to forget. You'll distract yourself. Delete your search history. Avoid anything with spirals or doors or names like Ramírez. But it won't matter, because now the house is part of you. Not the structure, not the walls, the idea, the possibility, the door behind your thoughts. And every time you try to remember where the story began, you'll find yourself back at that hallway, back at that room, back at that moment before the door opens, before the voice speaks. And you'll wonder, did I read this? Or did it read me? You may try to ignore it, but one night, maybe weeks, maybe years from now, you'll wake up at 3:14 a.m. with dirt in your mouth and your bare feet cold against what you don't recognize. And in the dark, from somewhere very near, a voice you knew long ago will ask, "Are you ready to come home?" The door will open, and you will step inside,